All right, so this is lecture 10, study guide, and we'll start with the first question. List 4 functions of the skeletal system. So one of the functions is to provide support for the body. Another function is to protect internal organs. So for example, the cranium protects the brain. Another function is hematopoiesis. Which is a production of blood cells. That happens in the bone marrow, the red bone marrow. There are more active bone marrow sites in a child than an adult. A last function is mineral storage. Okay, so it will store salt that contains calcium or phosphate. These are the main functions of the skeletal system. Next, list 4 types of movable joints and give examples of each. So the ones that we learned in class include pivot joint. So an example of pivot joint is the atlas, which is C1, and axis, which is C2. And so these are the first 2 bones in your vertebral column, in your backbone. It allows you to turn your head side to side. Another example of movable joints would be hinge joint, kind of like a door hinge, right? So example of that would be the elbow and the knee. Like that's a hinge joint, that's a hinge joint. We also have ball and socket. So that would be like the shoulder and the hip. Shoulder, hip. And these ball and socket joints, they provide a wide range of motion. Then we have saddle. Okay, so like the saddle of a horse, that would be carpals, metacarpals. Okay, so carpals are like over here at the back of your hand, and then metacarpals are at the feet. Okay, just to show you, right? Pivot joint right here at the neck, C1 and C2. Hinge joint looks like this. That's what a saddle looks like. Okay, 2 concave surface rubbed together. Ball and socket. There are other ones, right? Condyle joint, which we're not going to talk about, and then plane joint. So these ones you don't have to know. Okay, you just have to know the ones that I wrote over here. Okay. Next question, color all axial bones in blue and all appendicular bones in red. So axial bones are the bones that kind of form the core of your skeleton. Okay? And appendicular is everything that kind of hangs on it. Okay? So axial includes everything in the skull. It includes the vertebral column, the sacrum, and it also includes your rib cage as well. Okay. So all these are axial. And then we want the appendicular to be in red, okay, or pink in this case. So there is the appendicular, the clavicle, your collarbone. All the bones in the hand, the humerus, radius ulna, carpals, metacarpals, phalanges. So all these are appendicular. Your pelvic girdle, femur, tibia, fibula, and all the bones in the feet. Okay, so all these are appendicular. All right. So again, right, the axial is kind of like the main frame, and then all these things are just kind of appendages that attaches onto it. All right. Complete the following chart by providing examples for each type of bones. Flat bone. So flat bones are, as the name implies, they are quite flat. Examples of flat bone would be things that you find in the skull, for example. So parietal bone in the head, that's flat. Another one would be frontal bone. Okay. Long bone, any examples of long bone? Anyone want to tell me? Examples of long bone. Femur, yeah, that's correct, Patrick. Femur, it's the longest bone in the body. Just one more. Anyone can give me another long bone? So another one could be like the metacarpals, right? Metacarpals. So long bones are basically like rectangular bones that are where the length is longer than the width. Okay. Short bones, they are more like, cube shape. So if you think about the long bone, like femur is substantially longer than metacarpals. Metacarpals are the bones in your finger, in the back of your hands, right? But they are both classified as long bone because of their dimension. So for cube shape bones, we're talking about things that are more or less cube shape, okay, kind of like smaller things like that. Excuse me. And examples of short bone would be carpals. You have 8 of them, and they are found at the wrist, right? As well as your tarsals. Okay, 7 of them in the foot. Irregular bones are kind of bones that have complex shape, right? Complex shape. And they don't really fit in any other categories. So they're not flat, they're not short, they're not long. An example of these would be any of the vertebral columns. any of the bones in the vertebral column. So vertebrae, sacrum. Okay. All right, next one. List the names of bones that form the eye socket. All right, so let me just quickly review that with you. And so here is the skeleton. Let's see, how do we go full screen on this thing? Full screen. Okay. And this is available on eCentennial, right? You can play around with this thing and study it yourself. Okay. There we go. Oops. Okay, so this is the head, and we have the frontal bone here. You can see the frontal bone forms the superior side of the eye socket. And you only have one frontal bone. We have the, it's not really rotating properly, but anyway, this is the maxilla, which forms the upper socket for your teeth, as well as the bottom and a little bit of the middle of your eye socket. Okay, so there's frontal, there's maxilla. We have the zygomatic bone on the side. Okay, so one zygomatic on each side, and this also forms the prominence of your cheek. We have a sphenoid bone at the back. Okay, so if I isolate, you can see the sphenoid bone goes from one side all the way to the other side. At the top of the sphenoid bone, there is a groove. That's where the pituitary gland sits in. Okay, and at the back of your sphenoid bone, there are two openings. These openings are for your optic nerves from the eyeballs to go through. Okay. All right, so that's the sphenoid bone at the back. We also have some bones in the middle. We have the lacrimal bone. There are two of them, one on each side. Lacrimal bone on the right side, lacrimal bone on the right side. Okay, and this is where your tear duct is going to be going through. And behind the lacrimal bone, you have the ethmoid bone. Okay, so there are 6 of them, and the 7th one is kind of tricky. Okay, there's 7 one right here. You only see a little bit of it here. That's your palatine bone. If you remember from the digestive system unit, the palatine bone actually forms the roof of your hard palate. So if I rotate it here, let me see if I can do this. Okay, this is very difficult to rotate this thing. I don't know why is it going a little bit weird. Usually it's a little bit better to navigate. Nope, it's not letting me do it. Let me just zoom out first. And I completely lost the head. There it is. Let me see if I can isolate. Isolate. There we go. Okay, so that's the palatine bone. Okay. This is the part that goes into part of your eye socket, and it actually comes down all the way, right, to the bottom. And this bottom flat part here, that will form the hard palate, okay, behind the maxilla. So there you have it. Those are the bones of the skull. All right. Let's go back to this and fill it in. So the 7 bones, we have the frontal, okay, which forms the top of your eye socket. We have the maxilla, okay, which forms the bottom and a little bit of the middle. We have the zygomatic, which forms the side of the lateral side of your eye socket. We have the sphenoid bone, which forms the back of your eye socket. There is the acromial. Right? It forms the medial side. Ethmoid also forms the medial side. And finally, we have the palatine. Okay. These are the 7 bones that form your eye socket. Okay, list the various sections of your vertebral column from the cranial end to the caudal end. Cranial means the head, caudal means the tail end. Right? So we have 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 1 sacrum, and 3 to 5 coccyx bone fused together. And these are kind of like your tail bones, right? Okay. Let's see if we can take a look at the bones here. The vertebral column, I'm just gonna isolate one of them. Okay, so here's your typical bone of vertebrae. So, if as you go down the vertebral column, right, they get bigger and bigger. Right? So you have features like on the top side here, those things are going to be your superior articulate process. A process is something that sticks out. Okay, let me see if I can label this thing. Label, zoom in, zoom out. No, used to be able to label it. They keep on changing it. So in any case, that's going to be a superior articulate process, which will help connect with the previous bone, right? The bone that's on top of it. There is going to be the inferior articulate process. So let's say this is L3, right? Okay, lumbar section number 3. The inferior articular process of L3 will connect with the superior articular process of L4. Similarly, the superior articular process of L3 will be connecting with the inferior articular process of L2 on top of it. Okay, so they just kind of form these partially movable joint, right? And in between 2 vertebrae, you're gonna have a little bit of a cartilage. We call that the intervertebral discs, right? All this is in your notes, of course. Finally, you have the spinal processes at the back. Okay. You see there's a little groove here. Okay? That's where the spinal nerve comes out. All right. The next thing talks about the PTH and the calcitonin. This chart is already filled in the lecture, so I'm not gonna do it again. But I'll briefly go through like a flow chart with you. Okay, so last time we talked about, where was last time? Last time was lecture 9, right? Lecture 9. Last time we talked about let me see where that thing is. There. Last time we talked about this, right? How ANH and ROS are antagonistic pairs, right? So you have homeostasis for BP, and when BP goes up, ANH will bring it back down, and if BP drops, ROS will bring it back up. So in a very similar manner, that's what happens with the calcitonin and the PTH, right? But this time, instead of regulating blood pressure, we are going to be regulating blood calcium level. Okay, so homeostasis for blood calcium level. So what happens is, if the blood calcium level goes up, right, increase blood calcium. Okay, maybe you have a calcium-rich meal or something. Then the body will release the hormone calcitonin, and that comes from the thyroid gland. Thyroid gland releases calcitonin. Okay, the thyroid gland is kind of like close to your neck area, right? The throat area. And then calcitonin is going to bring the calcium level back down. How? A couple of things. Okay, it will reduce calcium absorption at the kidneys. Okay, so remember at the proximal tubule, that's where most of the absorption occurs, right? And then you're going to absorb more at the distal tubule and collecting down. So in the presence of calcitonin, we will reduce the calcium uptake because we already have a lot in the blood. Right? There's no point taking more back. So we tell it to take it easy. Do not absorb it anymore. Okay? And in addition, what you can do is the calcitonin will deposit calcium ions into bones. Okay, remember, bones is an excellent place to store calcium. So you have extra now in the blood, might as well put it in the bones. Okay, so together these actions will return the blood calcium level to normal. Now, of course, the opposite can happen. You can have decrease in blood calcium. That is the that's going to trigger the parathyroid gland releases parathyroid hormone, or PTH. Okay? The parathyroid glands are actually 4 glands that are on the back of your thyroid gland. Okay, so your thyroid gland looks like a butterfly. It's around your neck area. This is the front. If you flip it over, looking at the back, then there will be the parathyroid gland here. Okay, so this is the back, the posterior view. This is the front. Okay, so they are kind of piggybacking on the thyroid gland. So the PTH is going to help bring the calcium level back up. So instead of reducing calcium absorption, it's going to increase calcium absorption at kidneys and intestine. Okay. Furthermore, it is going to, instead of depositing calcium into the bone, it is going to absorb calcium from bones. So if the PTH level is continuously being elevated in a person, then the bones get weaker and weaker, right? Because calcium is being absorbed from it constantly. So that's how the PTH and the calcitonin works antagonistically to maintain blood calcium level. Do we have any questions? Okay. Moving on. This is talking about muscle. So we're going to skip that. We'll fill in the blanks afterwards. All these things are labeled already, right? In the recording, so there's no need to go through them. Let's take a look at the application questions. Exposure to sunlight is critical for the production of vitamin D in the body. Vitamin D is needed for calcium absorption. Due to low sunlight exposure in winter season, the Canadian Pediatric Society recommends all infants to take vitamin D supplements. Explain the physiological effects of vitamin D deficiency in infants and toddlers. Okay. So basically, here, the question tells you what happens, right? The vitamin D is needed for calcium absorption. Okay. So actually the PTH that we just talked about, right? The PTH is going to promote the absorption of calcium from the kidney as well as from the intestine. Okay? And if you want to absorb it from the intestine, you need to have the vitamin D. Right? So in the absence of vitamin D, you will not be able to absorb the calcium from your diet. Okay. And that will of course cause your blood calcium level to go down. Okay. And since you don't have a lot in your blood, there is not going to be a lot in your filtrate at the kidneys. So you can't really take it back from there either, right? So the only other source of calcium in that case would be from the bones. Okay. And of course, as the infant and the toddler is growing, you want the calcium to stay in the bone and not be reabsorbed from it, right? However, in the case of low vitamin D consumption, that's exactly what will happen. Right? Your body will constantly pump out PTH, and that would keep on taking the calcium from the bones instead of depositing on it, so their bone gets really, really weak. And if we're talking about a baby who's learning how to walk, then their femur is actually not strong enough to support the body weight. And in the lecture, I talk about rickets, right? Okay, and that's when you see the bowl-shaped legs of the kid, right? Because of vitamin D deficiency. Brand is a football player, and he was tackled from the side at the hip while running at full speed. Based on the X-ray shown, explain what happened, describe the articulation and all the bones involved. Okay, so we are looking at the hip here, and you can see there is a dislocation, right, between the head of the femur, okay, and the articulation. Okay, so that is part of your pelvic girdle. Okay, that is the acetabulum. Okay, and I think it's an E here, acetabulum, and the acetabulum is actually 3 bones, right, in the hip area. Let's take a look at that. Let me try to zoom in here. Let me see if I can delete this guy. There we go. Okay, so you can see full screen, right? That is the acetabulum. That's where the femur, the head of the femur goes in to form the ball and socket joint. And this is actually formed by the ilium on the top, the pubis at the front, right? As well as the ischium at the back. So all 3 of them will help form the acetabulum. All right. So that's basically what happens in the picture. All right. Any question? No. All right. Okay. And that's it for the bones, right? All these things are covered in the lecture, unless you guys have something specific you want me to go through. Otherwise, I'm going to do the muscle lecture now. Anything about the bones that you would want me to talk about? Okay. So this is the part B of the lecture, which was not recorded, and so I'm gonna go through this with you right now. Okay. If you want the PowerPoints, there is a link to it on the in the latest announcement that I post on eCentennial. Okay. All right, here we go. Functions of the skeletal muscle. Now we have 3 types of muscles, right? 3 types of muscle. We should write down here. 3 types of muscle. Okay, we have skeletal muscle, which is the ones that you can voluntarily control. There's smooth muscle, which are ones that you do not have voluntary control over. So that includes, muscle that moves the GI tract, right? It includes muscle that contract to control the opening and closing of sphincters. All those things are automatically controlled by your ANS. We do not have physical control over them. And then there is also the cardiac, which are only found in the heart. So 3 types of muscle. So this is talking about function of skeletal muscle, okay, muscle that we have voluntary control over. Okay, remember in the brain, we have the primary motor cortex. That's where the command originates when we want to move a particular body part. So the function includes supporting the body. Okay, so to sit upright, your back muscle, your postural muscle must continuously contract to counteract gravity, so we don't slouch over. Okay, make bones and other parts move. The bones themselves cannot move, right? The reason we can produce movement is because the muscles are pulling on the bones, right? Maintain a constant body temperature. If we are too cold, we will shiver, and the shivering is basically contractions of muscle, and that contraction is going to produce heat, warming ourselves up. Assist fluid movement in the cardiovascular and lymphatic vessels. We talk about how, like way back in lecture 1, the contraction of your leg muscle will help with venous return, right? So e.g. venous return. Okay, and since there is no pump connected to the lymphatic vessels, the movement of muscle is what will help propel the fluid inside lymphatic vessels. They protect the bones and internal organs as well as stabilize joints. So these are all the functions of the skeletal muscle. Okay, next we're going to talk about the structure and organization of skeletal muscle, and we're gonna take a note on that. Okay, so you should draw this with me. It's quite a complicated diagram, but I think drawing it is going to help you understand it. This is going to be muscle organization. All right. So let's say we have one bone here, okay, and then it's going to have another bone here. And there's another bone here. Okay. And connecting them, we're going to have a muscle. Okay, so there is a muscle. Okay. Muscle. And what connects the muscle to the bone is a tendon, right? Tendon. The ligament is what connects bones with bones. So there's tendon here, there's tendon here. Okay, and that's just a muscle in between. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we are gonna, maybe cut the muscle up, and we're gonna zoom in and see what it looks like. Okay. So there's a bone again. There's the tendon. Okay, and then we're gonna open up the muscle. We're gonna open up the muscle, and I'm gonna cut it open so we can see the cross section. Okay. Gonna give you a moment to catch up. I hope you're drawing this, right? Other than just watching. Okay. So first thing we're going to talk about is that the entire muscle is actually covered by a layer of connective tissue. Okay. I'm not going to color all the way in over here. I'm going to tell you why later. I'm just going to color it halfway. Okay, it's going to be covered by this connective tissue, the surface of it. All right. That is called the epimysium. Okay, so connective tissue. Covering the entire muscle. All right. Now on the inside, if we take a look at the cross section of the meat here, you actually will see groups of fibers. Okay. So these ones, this whole thing, one of these circles, they are called fascicle. Okay, fascicle, which is a bundle of muscle fiber. Okay. A muscle fiber is just another word for muscle cell. Okay. Muscle fiber is muscle cell. So if you group a bunch of muscle cells together, you would get a fascicle. Okay. Fascicle. Now, the fascicle themselves are actually surrounded by another layer of connective tissue. Okay, so each fascicle has its own layer of connective tissue wrapping around it. Okay, which is why I didn't color this thing all the way. Okay, if I were to peel back a little bit of the epimysium, immediately below the epimysium, you're gonna see the connective tissue that is surrounding the fascicle. So it's gonna be like pink below. Okay, so this pink stuff, that is the perimysium. Which is connective tissue covering each vesicle. Okay. And this is the layer that will also be contains blood vessels and nerves. Okay, so I'm going to add some blood vessels here. Okay, so maybe there's going to be a blood vessels here. You're going to have some veins next to it. Okay, and you're also going to have nerves. Okay? So these are nerve endings, for example. Blood vessels. Any questions? Okay. What we're going to do next is we're going to pull out one of these fascicles. Think of it as like a box of crayons. Okay, I'm going to pull out a crayon and see what it looks like. Okay, so I'm pull one of these things out. Okay, pull it out. And I'm going to cut it open and see. All right. So remember, surrounding our fascicle is going to be the perimysium. I'm just going to color it pink just to remind you it has the perimysium on it. There we go. Now, the fascicle, which is what this is, right? I should probably label it as well. Okay? This whole thing is a fascicle, right? If you look at the inside of the fascicle, you will see all the muscle fibers. Okay. I don't know if you guys eat meat. Maybe you are vegetarian, which is okay. But if you eat meat, if you think about like pulled pork sandwich, right? When you pull all the shreds out, the individual shreds are actually the fascicle that you're pulling out. Okay. And so I'm looking at one of those shreds, and inside there are many, many, many smaller structure. And each of them, each of these circles, that is a muscle fiber, right? Muscle fiber, a muscle cell. So a group of muscle fibers will form a fascicle. A group of fascicles will form the entire muscle. Now, maybe you are starting to see the trend here, right? The pattern. Surrounding each muscle fiber is going to be yet another layer of connective tissue. Okay, so it's just going to be going around each of these muscle fibers. Okay, so if I peel back this perimysium, I would immediately see the green stuff, right? So that is going to be the endomysium. Endomysium, which is connective tissue covering each muscle fiber. Right? So what we're going to do next is we're going to pull out another thing. We're going to pull out a muscle fiber and see what it looks like. So there we go. We're going to pull it out. Okay, I promise we are almost done. Going to pull it out. And, you know, it is, of course, going to be surrounded by the endomysium that we're just talking about. Okay. But if I pull away the endomysium, what is beneath it? Well, what's beneath it is actually the cell membrane. And so that's going to be the cell membrane right here. Okay. Remember, the muscle fiber is an individual cell, right? So you would expect it to have the cell membrane. So this here is the cell membrane. Now, it's a little bit tricky because when we talk about muscle, they kind of get their own special names. So instead of calling cell membrane, we call them sarcolemma. Sarcolemma. Okay. And this thing is a muscle fiber. Okay. It's a muscle fiber, a muscle cell. Okay. And the inside here, that will be the cytoplasm, right? Cytoplasm, right? With all the goodies that you will find in a cell. The mitochondria, right? The endoplasmic reticulum and all that stuff. Okay, so the cytoplasm is also going to have a special name, and it's sarcoplasm. Okay, everything is sarco. That's the prefix. And if you're still with me, first of all, good job. But we're going to do more. Okay, on the inside of the cytoplasm, inside our cell, our muscle fiber, our muscle cell, you will find, and this is the last one, I promise, you will find more stuff. More stuff. Okay. These individual things are going to be very long, runs the entire length of the muscle. And if I pull one of them out, okay, it's the last time we're going to pull things out. We'll pull one of them out like that. Okay, we get what we call a myofibril. Myofibril. Okay. So the myofibril is going to be composed of repeating units. Okay, so that's 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, and it's just connected end to end. each one of these things, we call this a sarcomere. Sarcomere, which is the contractile unit of muscle. Okay, so when these things contract, then the whole muscle contracts. It consists of thick filament, which we call myosin. Okay. This one has a head to grab onto stuff, and also thin filament, which is actin primarily, but there are also other things called troponin and tropomyosin. All right. I'll explain more in a second. So the thick filament is going to be like this. It's going to be in the middle. Thick filament is going to be in the middle like that. That's a thick one. Thick filament. Okay. And then the thin filament. What other color have I not used? Let's use like hot purple. Okay, so the thin filament, it's going to be like this. It's going to be in between them. Okay, and I'll show you a picture later on that hopefully will make it look better. Okay. Seriously, any question? Okay, and covering all these is going to be one final layer. Okay, all this yellow stuff that are going on top of it. Those are going to be the sarcoplasmic reticulum, okay, which is really just endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, and the key thing to know here is it contains lots of calcium, lots of it. All right. So there, that is the organization of muscle. Right? It's just like one of those I don't know what it's called. There's like a little doll thing or something, and then when you open it, there is another one inside, and then when you open it, there is another one inside, and then another one inside, right? So it's kind of like that. Okay, the structure superimposes on itself. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint if you guys don't have any questions. Here we go. So let's reiterate some of the stuff that we talked about. Right? Epimysium, that's the connective tissue that surrounds the entire muscle. Perimysium covers a bundle of muscle fibers, right? And a bundle of muscle fiber is essentially a fascicle, which is actually stated here. Can I change the color? I can. Okay, there we go. And the endomysium covers the individual muscle fiber, the individual cells. Okay? And attaching the entire muscle to the bone is going to be our tendon. Okay. Some words that we talked about, right? The regular name, we have cell membrane, cytoplasm, endoplasmic reticulum. But for muscle fibers, for muscle cells, we call them sarcolemma, sarcoplasm, and sarcoplasmic reticulum. The sarcolemma forms what we call these T tubules that will go into the cell and connects them with the sarcoplasmic reticulum, where calcium are going to be stored. All right, so this part we didn't really talk about, but I'll show you right now on a diagram. Okay. But first, let's see the professional drawing as opposed to the one that we just did. So we have the entire muscle here, and you can see it is surrounded by the epimysium, right? Okay, which is shown by this thing right here. This whole thing is the epimysium. And the entire muscle contains units of fascicle. So let me see. There's a fascicle. Fascicle, 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 fascicle. Each one of these is a fascicle. So now if you take a fascicle out, the fascicle is surrounded by perimysium. And inside the fascicle, we would have a muscle fiber, muscle fiber, muscle fiber. Okay, a muscle fiber is a cell, right? So each of these is a cell. Now, if I pull out the cell, if I pull out the muscle fiber, it is surrounded by endomysium. But immediately under the endomysium, this is the endomysium, right? Immediately under the endomysium, you're going to have the sarcolemma. Excuse me, I'm sneezing a lot this morning. Sorry. Sarcolemma. Okay. And these little dots that you see, I mean, you can see the mitochondria here, for example. There's a nucleus here. But all these little red dots that you see, those are going to be your myofibrils. Okay? And the myofibrils is surrounded by the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It's a yellow thing that I was drawing, like covering the entire myofibrils. Okay, and in this case, the sarcoplasmic reticulum is shown here by the blue stuff. Okay, now I did not draw this part on the diagram, but the sarcoplasmic reticulum shown here by the blue, maybe I should label that for you. Yeah, that's this stuff. Okay, sarcoplasmic reticulum. That's all these blue stuff. At the end of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, you're going to have these yellow structure, these tubes. These are the T tubules, transverse tubules that we were talking about on the previous slide. And these tubules will go all the way to the surface. Okay, so there will be these openings at the surface of the muscle, which would ultimately connect to the T tubules, which in turn connects to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. I'll show you another picture on the next slide, which will make it more clear. And then if we look at the myofibrils, right, what is it made up of? Well, it's made up of the thick filament, the myosin, which is shown in blue here, as well as the thin filament, okay, the actin, the troponin, and the tropomyosin. Let me write it down for you. Actin, troponin, and tropomyosin. Whereas the thick filament is just a myosin. Okay? We wrote it down already, but you know, whatever. Let's write down again. All right, and then this whole thing from one end to the other, that is going to be a sarcomere. Sarcomere. All right, so while this is still fresh in our head, let's fill it in on the study guide. I think there was a table for it, probably at the very end. Okay, very end right here. Yep. All right, so let's just fill this in together. And maybe we can label this guy too, to really help you understand. Okay, so first of all, over here. Help me out, guys. Show me that you understand what I just taught you. What is it that I just circled? This whole thing. What should I label that as? Help me out, please. Should I randomly pick someone to tell me what that is? Or maybe you can tell me what it is. Yes, Sierra, thank you. That is the epimysium. Okay. What about this thing? What is this thing? Let me pick on someone. Let's say, Gisela, do you know what that is that I'm pointing at? How about Jyoti? Do you know what this is?
I think that is muscle fiber.
That is, it's a bundle of muscle fiber. So good try though. That is the fascicle.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. That's a fascicle. Okay, so fascicle here, fascicle here, fascicle here. Okay, so I'm gonna pull one thing out of the fascicle. What is that? Shamira, you want to try and tell me what that is? If I pull one thing out of the fascicle. What is that?
Is that muscle fiber?
Yes, that is the muscle fiber. Thank you. Okay, no need to apologize, guys. It's okay. You guys are the troopers. Okay, we have 30 people in the class or something, and then only the 8 and 9 of you come consistently. So I'm already very happy that you guys are very dedicated. Okay, so that's the muscle fiber. Yes. And let's take a look at this. Okay, the thing that goes around the fascicle here. What should I label that as? Patrick, you wanna help me out here with that one, maybe? What might that be? No, or someone else? Maybe Mary, you know. Oh, Jyoti is gonna give it a shot.
Paramecium.
That's right, that is the perimysium. Okay, it is the membrane that surrounds the fascicle, right? Okay, the nerves are here. Okay, Mary. Okay. That could be a nerve. That could be a nerve. Like we just add some nerves here and there, and then you might have a blood vessel here and there. They're just kind of scattered around the perimysium. Okay, there we go. All right. How about that tiny thing here? Okay, last question. And then I will answer my own questions after that. What is that final thing that got pulled out right here? What is that? Anyone? Yes, that is the myofibril. Thank you. Myofibril. All right, that's the one that contains the sarcomere, right? The myosin and the actin. All right. Not bad, I guess. It takes some time to get used to. But here, surrounding the myofiber, that would be yet another layer of connective tissue. And that is the endomysium. Okay. That's that. All right. So let's fill this in. Skeletal muscle. The entire skeletal muscle is surrounded by epimysium. Okay. What's inside? What is inside the skeletal muscle? Okay. All these little things that I'm circling, each one of them is a fascicle. The pole park that I was talking about, right? All right. Fascicle. Now take out a fascicle. This is a fascicle. What is the fascicle surrounded by? Well, let's see. Fascicle is surrounded by the perimysium. And the perimysium contains, right, these individual units. Each one of this is a muscle fiber, a muscle cell. The muscle fiber is surrounded by the endomysium. Okay. Which contains myofibrils. Okay. And the myofibrils are surrounded by sarcoplasmic reticulum, which contains the sarcomere. All right.
Sir,
Yep.
do you mind showing the label diagram again?
Oh, like the one I drew?
No, the
Oh,
one.
this guy?
Yeah, thank you,
Okay,
sir.
sure.
Yeah, I just wasn't able to label one of them. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Does anyone else need more explanation? I can like clarify this for you. No? We all kind of understand now? Okay, so one time, one student told me, right? Like he was trying to help out in explaining this because it was so confusing. And he has a very good analogy, okay? Although I don't think everyone can relate to it, okay? So he was using the concept of a cigarette, okay? I don't personally smoke, but then when he talked about the analogy, it kind of makes sense. Okay, so I feel that some of you might still be a little bit confused here. So I'm gonna try to use his analogy. He was doing such a good job. I hope I can explain this as good as he did. Okay, so he's like, oh, okay, like when you go to duty free, at the border or something at Niagara Falls or something, you can buy like a huge pack of these cigarettes, right? Okay, so like a whole box of it. Okay, and he's like, oh, the whole box is like the muscle. And you know how they're surrounded by the shrink wrap, right? There's a shrink wrap that goes on top of it. Okay, so he's like the shrink wrap is like the epimysium surrounding the entire muscle. Okay, and then he goes, when you open up this box of cigarette that you purchase, inside would be many packs of the individual cigarettes, right? Do you guys follow? Even if you don't smoke, this should be easy to understand, right? So there will be like individual packs of cigarettes, okay? And this individual pack of cigarette would be corresponding to the fascicle, right? And each of these individual cigarette packs are also going to have their own shrink wrap, right? Okay, so the shrink wraps that goes around these individual cigarettes is kind of like the perimysium, okay? And then it's like, oh, if you take out a pack of cigarette now, okay, how do they even look like? Something like this, okay? And you open it up, then you can see the individual cigarettes, okay? And you can take one out, right? And of course, the individual cigarettes would now be corresponding to the myofibrils, okay? And it's surrounded by the white coating that goes around the cigarette, and the white coating would be like the endomysium. And if you look at the actual cigarettes, okay, and you can Google it if you don't know what a cigarette looks like, you can actually see the individual dots, right, where the tobacco is, okay, and those would actually be like the myofibrils themselves, okay. So it's like one thing inside the other. I don't know if that helps or not. I thought it was a pretty good analogy. Even for non-smokers, it might be relatable. But that's that. Okay. So I hope you can go through the diagram. The best way is just to draw it out. Seriously, like if you draw it out along with me, earlier. If you didn't, you can just watch the recordings and try to draw it out again. It's probably going to help you out. Okay, let's go back to our PowerPoint. And you know what? We still have quite a bit of slide. Maybe let's take a break first, okay? I've been talking all morning and you guys are probably tired from listening to me. Let's take a 5-minute break. We'll resume at 9:40-ish. And as usual, if you have questions, please leave them in the chat box. Okay, I'll see you in a bit. Hello, let's continue. So this next diagram will show us the picture like in its full detail, I guess. Okay, so we're looking at a cell here, right? A muscle fiber individual cell, and you can see all the myofibrils here. Okay? The individual myofibrils, as we talked about, consist of these sarcomere. Okay, and the sarcomere has thick filament in the middle and thin filament on the side. All right, and we'll take a closer look at this in the next slide. And you will see that each of the myofibril is surrounded by the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the blue stuff here. And remember, the sarcoplasmic reticulum is just fancy word for endoplasmic reticulum. And the key thing to know here is it contains calcium. Okay, contains calcium. And the calcium is going to play an important role in muscle contraction. We'll talk about that in a second. And all these yellow stuff, that's the T tubules, right? And you can see if you take away the sarcoplasmic reticulum, the T tubules actually make it all the way to the surface of the cell, you know, where there are openings. So that is an opening to the T tubules. Okay. So there you have it, and you can see, you know, the inside of the muscle fiber, the muscle cells. You're actually going to have all your usual stuff. You're going to have the mitochondria here, right? And you're going to have some of the other organelles, which is not shown here, but they are there. All right. So the myofibrils, right? The sarcoplasmic reticulum encases hundreds and sometimes even thousands of myofibrils, which are bundles of myofilaments. Okay, and they're really, really small, and they are composed of sarcomeres, as we talked about multiple times, joined end to end. And the sarcomere themselves have thick filaments and thin filaments. Okay, now let me just try to draw the sarcomere. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to draw it. I'm going to come back to this in a second. But I'm going to take a closer look at this drawing of the sarcomere. So in this picture, you can see the blue here. The blue here is the myosin. Okay, myosin. And then the red here, they are the actin. Yeah. And the myosin actually have heads at the very end. That's what these little spiky stuff are. They're little heads that could grab onto the actin. So when they grab onto the actin, they're going to pull in this direction. Okay, causing it to be shortened, causing the sarcomere to be shortened, and you can see there is more overlaps here, right, between the actin and the myosin. So as the sarcomere contracts, it's going to cause the entire myofibril to become shortened, which in turns cause your entire muscle to become shortened. Okay, so the individual band, the individual the individual filaments themselves, the myosin and actins, they do not change length. It is the amount of overlap that changes, which results in the contraction. All right. Anybody have any question? Okay, so there's a video that I posted online on East Centennial that you can watch. I mean, I'm not going to play it now. I always feel that it's not the best use of time to play a video during a Zoom call. You can probably watch it on your own to have a better understanding of it. Okay. Now, we will actually have to talk about this picture here. All right. So a lot of details. Please pay attention. So all these balls, all these circle balls, sphere-looking thing, Okay, these are the actin. Okay, remember, I don't know if you remember, that was a long time ago. Last semester, you learned about the actin filament, the intermediate filaments, all that stuff in the cell unit, right? So the actin filament is actually made of these individual units. Okay, and what happens is on the individual subunits, there is a binding site. Okay, so these little black stuff that is kind of hiding. Okay, that's the myosin binding site. Okay, and in order for the myosin head to grab onto the actin, the binding site must be exposed. Okay, and right now they're not exposed because they're covered by these green vine-like structure. Okay, and those are the tropomyosin. Okay, and the position of the tropomyosin is controlled by the troponin. Okay, so let me write all these down for you, and hopefully it'll make sense. Okay, so myosin binding sites located on actin are covered by tropomyosin. Okay, the green stuff here. Okay, another point is the position of the tropomyosin is controlled by troponin, which is the blue stuff here. All right. When you're ready, we will talk more. I just need you to take a moment and copy that down. So how do you shift the position of the tropomyosin? Well, we're going to need calcium. All those calcium in the endoplasmic reticulum, right, in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, when they come out, it will bind to the troponin. Calcium binds to the troponin, and then it will shift the tropomyosin, exposing all these binding sites for myosin. Okay, so once they're exposed, the myosin will grab onto it, and then using ATP, it will pull on the actin. And as the myosin pulls on the actin, remember the other picture I was showing you, right? These are the actins. I'm just gonna show you one actin to keep it simple, and then this is the myosin with the head. Okay, so once the myosin grabs onto the actin, it will pull towards the center, and as a result, it's gonna get like shorter, right? There's gonna be more overlap, like this. Okay, so that creates contraction. Okay, but the key thing to remember is basically what I said here. In the presence of calcium, okay, calcium will bind to troponin, which will roll away the tropomyosin, exposing the binding sites. Okay. Once the binding sites are exposed, the actin will, the myosin will grab onto those sites and pull towards the center. All right. All right, that's it. So we talked about this already. Now let's talk about the actual events that will lead to the muscle contraction. Okay, so this is the spinal cord, a section of spinal cord. You probably recognize it from the butterfly and all that. And remember, we have a motor neuron coming out, right? Okay, motor neurons come out from the front, and then the sensory neuron goes in at the back, right? Okay, so the motor neuron is going to carry a command to move a particular muscle, okay? Because there will be like signals coming down from the descending track from the brain. And what's going to happen is, I'm just going to show the whole picture. What's going to happen is the motor neuron is actually going to make a synaptic connection with these muscle fibers inside the individual fascicle. Okay, so I'm going to label some of these things for you. Remember, this PowerPoint is available on eCentennial, right? So this is a fascicle. Okay, and inside the fascicle is a bunch of muscle fibers, and all these motor neurons are actually going to split as it approaches the muscle fibers, and it's going to make a connection with these muscle fibers. So the whole group is going to contract when the signal comes, right? So this is a neuromuscular junction. So over here, that would be the axon terminal. All that stuff from Unit 2, right? I hope you still remember axon terminal of motor neuron. And then there's going to be the vesicles with the neurotransmitters, right? Okay, and here is going to be your muscle fiber. Okay. So what happens is when the action potential comes, when the signal arrives, you will release the neurotransmitter, and the neurotransmitter is acetylcholine or ACH. Okay, acetylcholine will then create a signal that causes the impulse to spread down the T tubules, and then the signal from the T tubules will cause the sarcoplasmic reticulum to release calcium. Okay, so ACH will create, we'll just say a signal that spread down the T tubules, which in turns will cause calcium to be released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, once the calcium is out, then you know what happens for the rest of the way, right? The calcium will bind to the troponin, roll away the tropomyosin, exposing the binding site, and then you're going to have contraction. All right, that is it. Any question? No questions. All right, let's move on. So we're going to talk about a few disorders, motor neuron disorders. So one of them is polio. Okay, polio, you might have heard of it. It actually is a virus that will infect and kill motor neurons, and it could cause paralysis, and in some extreme cases, it could result in death. For example, if the motor neuron that controls the breathing muscle is damaged, then the person will not be able to breathe, right? And that obviously will be very problematic. And polio mainly affects kids that are under the age of 5, which is why we have the polio vaccine. And we were actually really close to eradicating polio. But at one point we were just down to like a couple hundred of cases or something like that. But then because some of the regions where the polio virus is still exists are actually kind of controlled by some terrorist group, and so that impedes the vaccination effort of many different organizations. So as of now, it is still something that exists. And 1 in 200 infections can lead to irreversible paralysis. Okay, and so that is the polio virus. ALS is another one. You probably have heard of ALS, and this is Stephen Hawking, one of the famous physicists who suffer from ALS. It is an autoimmune disorder where the motor neurons are being attacked by the body cells, and that causes you to not be able to move your muscle. There is actually a movie based on Stephen Hawking about his struggles with ALS. I think it's called The Theory of Everything or something. So if you're interested, you can look that up. Okay, botulism and tetanus. Botulinum is a toxin that prevents motor neurons from releasing acetylcholine. Okay, so remember acetylcholine or ACH is the neurotransmitter that is necessary to cause the calcium to be released and all that, right? So if you are poisoned by botulinum, you cannot release ACH. That means you cannot move your muscle. Okay, so you would become paralyzed. All right. Botulinum is also the same thing that people use in Botox, right? Botox, it's like kind of the thing that you inject yourself with to kind of get rid of the wrinkles, right? And the reason it works is because at very, very low dose, you're not gonna cause like a death, but you will cause muscle paralysis in kind of some of the facial muscle, and that kind of paralysis causes the wrinkles to not show up. I mean, your wrinkles basically only shows up when you move your facial muscle, right? So if it's kind of paralyzed, then I guess they don't really show up. But it's a very, very potent toxin. Okay, and the bacteria that makes it is anaerobic. That means it doesn't need oxygen. Okay? So food can be contaminated with botulinum, even in canned food, because again, the bacteria does not need oxygen to survive. Tetanus is another one, and this one, it will block the release of neurotransmitter that inhibits motor neuron. Okay, so this one is a little bit complicated to understand. So first of all, motor neuron is going to allow you to do contractions, right? Okay, but obviously let's say you want to pick up something, so you contract your bicep, and afterwards when you put the object down, you need the bicep muscle to relax, right? Okay, so you will need something to inhibit those motor neurons. But in the presence of tetanus, the neurotransmitter that is supposed to inhibit the motor neuron is being blocked, okay? Which means you will contract your muscle, but you won't be able to relax afterwards. Okay, so if someone has tetanus, then they will be locked in a particular contracted state and not be able to relax. This is perhaps the most famous picture that you can find on the internet for tetanus. This is an artist's depiction of someone suffering from tetanus during the Second World War, I believe. Okay, so the soldiers were getting infected from wounds in their feet when they're in the trenches, because the bacteria also is anaerobic, and they live in damp soil, for example, or you might have heard people say, if you get cut by broken glass, you gotta go, get a tetanus shot, right? If you get cut by broken glass at the beach or something, right? Because again, the bacteria can live in those environments. If you get bitten by a dog, as I did, right, last year, I told you, I also need a tetanus shot because the bacteria that causes tetanus apparently can live in the dog's saliva without affecting them. So I got my shot after I was bitten. Okay, so botulinum and tetanus. Okay, and finally, just 2 more slides. When we eat chickens, okay, again, if you're vegetarian, then that's okay as well. But if you eat chickens, then you can order dark meat or you can order the white meat, right? Does anybody know which part is the dark meat for the chickens? Anyone? If you order Kentucky Fried Chicken or something, and you want the dark meat, which one is that? The legs. Okay, yeah, the legs are the dark meat, and the breasts are going to be the white meat, right? So, what exactly is the difference between the dark meat and the white meat? Well, it all comes down to the percentage of what we call slow twitch fibers versus fast twitch fibers. Okay, so slow twitch fibers are fibers that are good for endurance activities. Okay, so these slow twitch fibers, they can contract for a very long time without getting tired. Okay, so the reason why they are dark is because they contain a special type of molecules called the myoglobin, and the myoglobin allows oxygen delivery to be more efficient. Okay, so that you don't have to go into fermentation. You're going to be able to contract continuously without getting tired. So muscle that are required for endurance, they are going to have a high percentage of slow twitch fibers. Okay, so your postural muscles, the muscles at your back, right? Those are going to be containing high percentage of slow twitch fibers. Right? So these tend to be the dark meat. If you think about the beef, for example, like the cows, they can stand there all day and not get tired. That's a lot of slow twitch fibers. Okay, duck breast is dark meat because the ducks can fly, right? Okay, the breast muscle is essentially what helps them to flap the wings and then they could fly. And as a result, the breast is dark meat compared to the chickens. The chickens, the breast is white, and that means it will get tired easily, so they cannot fly. Okay. Salmon also has red meat. It's considered as dark meat because, as you might know, salmon swim against the current, right? So they have to keep on moving against the current without getting tired. So a lot of slow twitch fibers. Whereas fast twitch fibers, they're good for rapid movement. Okay, like jumping to catch a ball, sprinting to catch a bus, or if you are like a fish, like a normal fish, like a tilapia or something like that, you have to rely on the fast twitch fibers to kind of dodge out of the way when a predator comes, right? Okay, so those are not very good for endurance. They are good for bursts of energy, right? So a sprinter would have more fast twitch fibers in the leg muscle, whereas a marathon runner would have more slow twitch fibers. It's not exclusive, okay? It's not either slow or fast. It's all about the percentage, and you can train your body to switch the percentage. It's not set in stone. Okay, it's easily convertible from one type to the other. And that is it for the muscle. All right, let's go back and fill in the rest of the thing here. All right, 3 types of muscles. All right, we did that already. And let's just write down again. We have skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. Yeah, those are the 3 types. Okay. Muscle with higher percentage of fast twitch fibers are best used for. Okay, so fast twitch are good for bursts of energy. Okay, so sprinting. Jumping out of the way of danger. Okay. Muscles with high percentage of slow twitch fibers are good for endurance. Okay, so like postural muscle, Okay, you can literally stand for hours, right? But you won't be able to run at full speed for hours, right? Okay, so running at full speed requires fast twitch fibers. Standing is just slow twitch fibers. Okay, so this would be marathon. Okay. Okay, fill in the blanks. Let's do this together. Okay, bone cells. Bone cells are called osteocytes. Osteocytes. During development, cartilage and connective tissues are replaced by bone in a process called ossification. Okay. Our skeletons are cartilage to begin with, and they slowly get converted into bones through this process. Okay. And it involves depositing calcium into the cartilage. The surface of bone is covered by a layer of vascular connective tissue called the periosteum. The shaft of long bone is called the diaphysis. Okay, so if you think about the bone like this, the diaphysis is right here. Okay, whereas the ends of the long bone, that's the epiphysis. The structural unit of compact bone is called an osteon. Okay, and if you haven't already, please watch the video where I describe what an osteon is. Bone cells specialize in breaking down bones to release calcium. That is the osteoclast. Okay, so the PTH that we talked about that helps absorb calcium from the bone, that's the cell that is going to get stimulated. And working against the osteoclast is the osteoblast. They specialize in depositing calcium into the bone matrix. Okay, calcified matrix of compact bone, that is the lamina. Pockets found throughout the osteon, those are the lacuna. They have really weird names. Okay, well, this is plural, so we should add an E, lacunae. Small channels that are radiating from the lacuna, those are the caniculi. Okay. Missing an I, caniculi. The temporal bone houses the ear, actually the auditory canal, the ear canal. The maxilla and the palatine form the hard palate of the oral cavity. Maxilla is the front 2/3, palatine is the back 1/3. There is a big hole at the bottom of the occipital bone that is called the foramen. A foramen is a hole, right? Foramen magnum. Magnum means really big hole. Literally, that's what it means. Okay, the back of the eye socket, sphenoid bone. The only movable bone in the head is the one that forms your lower jaw. It is the mandible. Mandible. Okay, and it forms a joint with the temporal bone. There is something called the mandibular temporal joint, right? The MTJ. You probably would have heard of it if your jaw makes a clicking sound when you move them. Okay, your doctor will be like, "Oh, your MTJ is, connected a little bit funny." Okay, so it makes the clicking noise, but there is nothing you can do really. The something bones form the prominence of the cheek that is the zygomatic. C1, C2 forms the pivot joint, and C1 is called atlas. C2 is axis. Okay. If you have trouble memorizing this, L comes alphabetically before X. So this is C1, C2. Spinal nerve exit through opening called the intervertebral. Intervertebral foramen. Found on the lateral sides of vertebra. 3 parts of the sternum. We have the manubrium, body, and the xiphoid process. Bones of the forearm, radius, ulna. And the radius is the one on the lateral side, ulna is the one on the medial side. These are also the bones that you found in the chicken wings, right? It's the analogous portion in the chicken relative to us. The knee and elbows are example of hinge joint. Something of bones that form fingers and toes, phalanges. The coxal bones, which are the bones that forms the pelvic girdles, have 3 bones: the ilium, pubis, and the ischium. You are sitting on the ischium right now. The head of the femur joins the coxal bone at the acetabulum. Okay, remember that socket that is formed by all these bones? Whereas the 2 coxal bones, they joined anteriorly at the pubis symphysis. The patella is also known as the kneecap. The heel bone is also known as calcaneus. Parathyroid hormone is secreted from the parathyroid gland. Okay, and that happens when you don't have enough calcium in the blood. The calcitonin lowers blood calcium level, and it's secreted from the thyroid gland. Okay, so remember, PTH and calcitonin, they have opposite effects. Rickets is a condition caused by lack of vitamin D, right? Characterized by bowl-shaped legs in children. Connective tissue that surrounds the entire muscle. We talked about this multiple times already. That's the epimysium. And the connective tissue that surrounds the fascicle, that would be the perimysium. Connective tissue that surrounds the individual muscle fiber, endomysium. The sarcomere is the contractile unit of skeletal muscle. And the 2 main proteins that makes up the sarcomere is the actin and the myosin. Okay, so the myosin grabs onto the actin, shortening the sarcomere, resulting in contraction. Okay. So lots of stuff here for you to study this week. If you have time, I would suggest you move ahead with lecture 11 and 12. 12 is like the one that has a lot of memorization going on. Okay, but again, fortunately, it's going to be open book, so you will have an advantage there. But still, you should watch the recordings earlier rather than later, because it will take a few viewings probably for you to fully understand it. Okay, so that is it. I will see you all next week. Next week is pretty short, the lesson. Okay, 11, because most of the stuff is already filled in from the recordings. So I'm just gonna briefly talk about it, and then we'll see what happens. Okay. Thank you for coming. I will see you all next week. Bye for now.